Good morning. My name is Bumi Afolabi, a senior HR analyst within the Human Resources Department. This morning, I'm making this presentation on human resources metrics as part of our input towards the 2020 budget planning process. One of the things that is still currently being debated is how much we're going to spend on learning and development in the coming year. I'm going to be speaking with you on the metrics that we're going to use, how we're going to measure that metric, how it's going to be used within the department, and how that metric is relevant to the organization and to HR. The specific metrics I will be looking at is the training efficiency metric index. This is because typically the reason why we would be debating how much to spend on training is because we're not sure if there is actually a return on that investment. Now, I measure the training efficiency index by looking at the total training dollars spent per employee divided by the effectiveness of that training. So that leads me to ask, what is training effectiveness? This is something that can be difficult to measure, but in trying to do so, we first of all have to go back to the basics. What was the motivation for the training? Was it done as a reward? Was it something that was actually needed, or was it just a nice to have? If it was a need, then we also have to ask ourselves, how was the need determined? Was it done just based on a point in time incident, or was it something that was observed over time, maybe in the last 1 month, in the last couple of months, and we decided that there is an intervention that training can help us with? In measuring effectiveness, one of the tools that we typically use is the Kirkpatrick Model, which you can see on the screen. That basically looks at 4 levels of measuring the effectiveness of training. At the first level, it's all about what is the reaction of the participants to the training. Did they think it was good? Did they think it was worth their while? And then from there, we move on to level 2, which is, did they actually learn anything? Did they learn anything new? Did they see something in a different light? Did they see something that they believe can help them in the work that they need to do? Going on from there then is level 3, which is behavior. Is there going to be any behavioral change as a result, a direct result of this training? And then, of course, the final thing is, what are the results that we then get from the behavioral changes that the participants come out with? In doing this, we have to define our tactics very explicitly. First of all, we need to be very sure and determine the objective of the training from the word go. What exactly are we solving for, and how would we know when we have solved it? In answering that, we then need to determine what are the key indicators of change. There typically would be 2. The first one is behavioral change, which of course can be difficult to measure, but it's not impossible. And there are 2 ways that we would need to look at that. First of all, there is the self-awareness from the training participants themselves. Do they actually believe that there has been a change in their behavior as a result of that training? So for example, say someone had anger management issues. Do they now believe that as a result of whatever they have learned, they're better able to control their emotions, they're better able to handle their interactions with other people? The second part to that is 360-degree feedback. It's also important that the people who interact with the person in question are also able to provide feedback that says that there has been definite change in the behaviors that they have observed. We would use those 2 as one of the indicators of change. The other one, which does not apply in all situations, is quantitative measures. So where possible, we also want to measure what are the specific quantitative things that we can see this training has brought about. So for example, and this is just a very basic example, if someone is able to do a report in a shorter period of time, or perhaps do many more reports within the same period of time that they did prior to the training, then that is a specific quantitative measure that we can use to know that we have achieved what we wanted to do. It's also very important that when we assess these changes, we do them not just over a short period of time. It has to be a sustained assessment, typically over the first month in the immediate term, perhaps 3 months in the short term, and maybe at least 6 months for a longer term assessment to be sure that the behavior has actually become habit as a result of that training. And once we're done with all this, it is also important that the changes that we observed are incorporated into the performance appraisal process as much as possible. Typically, some of these changes would actually have been triggered as a result of performance appraisal, either formal or informal. So it's also important that it is also reassessed at the next cycle so that we can kind of like close the loop and be able to be sure that we have done what we were supposed to do. Now, having said all that, it's also important to put in or to talk about some other considerations. As the Learning and Development Department, we are aware that we should not and cannot and would not throw training at every performance issue. We definitely have to think holistically about all the different options that are available to address any performance issues. Sometimes coaching could just be the solution. At other times, it could be on-the-job practical training, and yet another time it could be job shadowing. Now, I've mentioned 3, but there could be any number of other ways that we could do this, and it's our responsibility within the learning and development team to ensure that we appraise all the different methods that we could use. When we do decide that training is needed, then we also have to think about what kind of training. Is it going to be self-paced? Is it going to be face-to-face instructor-led? Also, what mode of training? Thankfully, with COVID now, a lot more options have opened up to us. There's video, there's audio, and then there's reading. Of course, in doing this, I'm also taking into account the fact that people have different learning styles, and we need to try and accommodate that as much as possible. So having said all that, it's also important that we circle back and tie this to the relevance to the organizational strategy, which of course HR strategy ties into. Very, very importantly, we believe and we have seen evidence that training that achieves its objectives leads to improved employee productivity. It leads to improved employee efficiency, as well as, of course, if it's a team leader, it would enhance and make for better team leadership or better teamwork for members of the team. Without a doubt, an employee that sees the organization investing dollars into developing them will have a higher employee satisfaction, which would lead to an increased effective commitment on the part of the employee towards the organization. But at the end of the day, bottom line is that this all delivers competitive advantage to the organization, which then allows us to excel and compete better within the market space. In conclusion, I would like to say that we should not and we cannot afford to deprioritize training, even in spite of the fact that we're in a pandemic, in spite of the situation that we currently find ourselves in. The pandemic is not going away, so we need to begin to learn to live with the effects, if not the actual thing itself, in the longer term. For sure, from the things I have said, it's clear that the return on investment on training can be determined, and also the benefits impact the bottom line. Our job as HR and the learning and development team is to ensure that we find all the different variety of ways that learning and that development can take place. It's going to be our duty to explore every opportunity, every avenue, and maximize the training spent for return on investment. We must also ensure that we prioritize the measurement of training effectiveness in order to ensure that we prove our strategic partnership to the business. At this point, I'm happy to take any questions and hopefully provide you with the needed answers. Thank you very much.